Welcome to the first training session on basic CarePortal Medicare patient processing. Our goals for this session are to perform a new patient intake in the back office, complete the start of care assessment in the point of care, then in the back office, validate, transmit, and create the wrap for the start of care. This flowchart provides a graphical overview of where we're headed. User Peter Pan logs into the CarePortal back office and enters a new intake for patient Captain Hook. Again, in the back office, user Peter Pan assigns the first visit for Hook to the point of care clinician Tinkerbell, who receives a message notifying her of the new patient. Now on the point of care side, user Tinkerbell logs into her account, selects the visit on her calendar, and completes the start of care oasis in the patient's home. Then user Tinkerbell submits the start of care assessment to the back office. On the back office side again, user Peter Pan reviews and transmits the start of care oasis from the back office to the state. Then user Peter Pan uses the CarePortal one-click billing feature to submit the wrap to Medicare and receive the 999 acceptance acknowledgement. At this point, we're going to log into CarePortal as user Peter Pan. And we'll go to Clinical, where we see we already have a sample patient added, but we're going to add a new patient named Captain Hook. So we'll click the New Patient button, and we'll type in Captain for his first name and Hook for his last name. So we're going to add the Social Security number ahead of time. We'll make him a male, and date of birth 01/01/1940. And we'll make him an unknown race. This will allow the start of care nurse to be able to review the items for this patient later on while doing the start of care assessment and be able to make corrections, changing the race to whatever is appropriate. I'm going to scroll down through and find another required set of items. Take a look at the address here. Even though it's not required, I'm going to go ahead and put that in, 123 Main Street. And for my city-state zip, I recommend just putting in the zip code, 75146, and you can see how it zeroes in on the city-state zip that you're interested in, and then as you click that, it fills in the details, including the CBSA code and so forth for billing purposes. I'll go ahead and type in a telephone number for the patient, and as I do so, I don't need to type in the dashes. It puts those in for me. I'm going to go ahead and choose a program, Medicare in this case. This is for your informational purposes only, to help you categorize your patients. It does not affect how billing is processed itself. That will be more in the patient insurance area that we'll see that. So as I put in Medicare program for this patient, I'm going to advance down to the agency assigned patient ID. This is your agency patient ID that you assign to the patient. Now it can be auto-assigned. In this case, I've got ID number 1001 as the default, and each subsequent patient that I add will increment by 1, so the next one will be 1002 and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and put in a Medicare ID. And because this is not a Medicaid patient, I'm going to click NA. Even though it says required, the NA satisfies the requirement in this case. If it had been a private insurance patient, we would put a HIC number in the patient claim ID in this box here. But we'll leave that blank since this is a Medicare patient. Case manager, I'm going to choose Peter Pan. And for the level of care, this helps us to know which patients have the highest priority in the case of a disaster like a hurricane or a snowstorm or what have you. So in this case, this patient is high priority, needs services BID or daily. And that's all the required information that we need to put in. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. So it's telling me it doesn't like the format of my Medicare HIC number. So I'm going to go ahead and check that. Looks like it was not long enough. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save now. Alright, so at this point I have several tabs across the top after my patient information was saved successfully. The first tab sequentially after the patient is the MD, and notice it's in yellow, indicating that there's not been a physician added for this patient yet or assigned to this patient. So I'm going to click the MD tab, and I'm going to click New Entry to add the first physician. I can add one or more physicians, the first being the primary. So I can either start typing part of the physician name here, or I can click on this triple dots button, and I see there's only one physician here. I can select that physician. If I had wanted to type, I could start with a blank one, just start typing Brad, B-R-A-D, and notice how it comes up there for me. This is the preferred method because it's quicker, it allows you to zero in right on what you're looking for. You can, for your own informational purposes, you can specify the nature of this physician, whether this physician will be signing the face-to-face encounter and so forth, but this is optional information. I'm going to go ahead and click Save, and that will establish our primary physician. If there are other physicians that you want to assign to the patient, you can click New Entry and you can add as many physicians as you wish. So going to the next tab in the sequence, I'm going to go to the Admissions tab. We have not yet admitted the patient. We've only added the demographics and the physician assignment. So in order to add the admission, we're going to click New Entry. And notice how the primary referral source takes on by default the physician assigned, the primary physician assigned to the patient. We can put in a referral date. Let's go ahead and put in the 20th of January. And same thing for the start of care date. Let's put in the 20th. Need to put in the service location, patient's home. And the discipline of the first visit we'll say is going to be skilled nursing. That's the default, although if you have a PT only situation, you can assign PT for that patient. And then we can also assign the worker who will be doing the first visit, in other words, the start of care visit. And let's assign that to Tinkerbell, start of care nurse, so that she will receive that visit as a message when she logs into CarePortal. And also it will send a text message to her if she's signed up to receive text messages. The patient is not a transfer from another home health agency. If it was a transfer, we would check this checkbox to ensure that the correct code goes out in the claims that are generated for the patient. The confirm admission is optional at this point. If you know the patient is coming on service and you're going to proceed, you can go ahead and check this checkbox up front. Although I recommend leaving this unchecked initially, because what will happen is that once the start of care assessment is validated, then it will automatically select this for you and the patient admission will be confirmed automatically. Now notice for the patient medical record number, we had assigned, or we had accepted the default assignment of 10001 or 1001. And for the first admission, since this is the first admission, it automatically takes on 01 as the admission level medical record number. The next time if we were to discharge the patient and readmit the patient, it would have 1001-02 automatically. I'd recommend not changing these numbers unless there's a compelling reason to do so, and you can ask CarePortal support if there is a compelling reason to do that. All right, so some of these other items can be optionally specified in the patient admission record. Later on, you'll see how you can put in a non-admit date or a discharge date, but some of these, especially the discharge date, are filled in automatically on a normal patient. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click Save to establish that admission record. All right, so now we've saved the admission. We have admission starting 1/20/2014. If we'd like, we can also put in prior hospitalization and skilled nursing facility admissions. I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and you can click New Entry, and you can specify hospital name, start date, and end date to keep track of those items. That's optional. You can also put in supplemental referral sources. For example, if you had a marketer who was responsible for referring this patient, you can go ahead and put a new entry in here to specify the date and the source, the name of the worker who made that referral. Or if there was a hospital in addition to the physician, you could also specify the hospital as a supplemental referral source. So I'm going to click back to take us back to the main admission screen. Notice also that hanging off of the admission is the cert periods for this particular admission. And automatically, when you put in the admission to start with, it's going to give you a shell for a cert period starting the same day as the admission date. Later on, if the patient is recertified, they'll have multiple cert periods. For now, there's only one cert period, and it starts on 120 and goes through 320. I'm going to click back. All right, so let's advance again through the tabs. We've done the patient, the physician, the admission record, and later on, by the way, once the patient is discharged and readmitted, you will not create a new patient. It's absolutely imperative that you do not create a new patient for a patient who's been discharged and readmitted. Instead, you'll come back in here, and once the patient has been discharged, the discharge date will show here, and there'll be a button that says New Entry here to allow you to put in a new admission. So it's important to readmit the patient and not add a second copy of the same patient. Let's advance now to the Insurance tab. And by default, because we put in Medicare, it automatically assigned a Medicare insurance payer policy for the patient. And it just assumed we're going to use a date in the distant past as the start date. This doesn't really matter. It just matters for billing purposes that you have date coverage for that particular policy. Later on, if the patient changes insurance, you're going to click New Entry. Well, first you would probably put the termination date for Medicare. Let's say that the patient terminated Medicare on December 31st, 2013. Well, you would edit this one and put the termination date in as December 31st, 2013. Then you click New Entry and put in a new payer policy with a new payer name starting January 1st, 2014. You would not change the existing one. You would leave the existing one in place except for putting in the termination date. And then you would create a new one so that you have two payer policies that are distinguished by their effective and termination dates. So in this payer policy, if you needed to put more information in, all of this is available for you. Termination date, you can put in some notes, group name, and so forth. But for Medicare, really nothing further is required other than what is already supplied for you. All right, so that completes the intake portion in the back office. So at this point, we're going to go home, and we're going to sign out. And according to our flow chart, which we'll revisit here, notice we've completed the intake in the back office for Captain Hook by user Peter Pan. He's assigned the first visit. And so if Tinkerbell had been set up to receive a text message, she would receive a text message indicating she needs to take care of this patient that's been assigned to her. And then now we're going to log in as Tinkerbell in the point of care. The login is largely the same, except that because Tinkerbell is assigned point of care user privileges, she's going to see a much more stripped down menu that is geared specifically to point of care functionality. Specifically, we want to take a look at the My Schedule calendar view. The dashboard has some other advanced options that we'll get back to later, but the My Schedules what we want to take a look at this point. And notice that there's a visit assigned to her for Monday, January 20th, as per the start of care date that we assigned when we did the intake for Captain Hook. So normally a worker, a point of care worker, is going to see a much more complete calendar here with many visits, many patients that are assigned to the worker on a number of different dates. And so this is like her go-to point that will allow her to know, who do I need to see today? Who do I need to see tomorrow? Who was I supposed to see yesterday that I didn't see? So any visits that have not been fulfilled will show up as red visits on the calendar. If they are green, that will indicate that they are either current or future. They're not behind. In this case, we're behind because this is in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and select this visit on the calendar, and it tells me this is a start of care visit. That tells me that I need to do an OASIS 45 rather than just a simple visit note. So I'm going to select the OASIS 45 option. And notice that most of the items here are filled in for me. If I was going to be doing a commercial start of care, or a PT start of care. I have different options here that I can choose. For example, if it's a PT only situation, I can choose 1-PT start of care. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and accept the default, which is a regular skilled nursing start of care that includes not only the OASIS, but also the 45 information and additional clinical information captured for that assessment. All right, and if I need to change the times, by default, it's assigned to a visit date that matches the start of care date. And so, but I can change this by clicking the button, and if I wanted to change the date to the 21st, I could do that. Otherwise, I can just go ahead and choose the 20th to keep it like it is. If I want to change the time, I specify that in the visit date and start end times. The first button here is the start time, and so if I want to choose maybe 11 a.m., I can do so in this way. And likewise for the end time, let's say that it's going to be 12:30 p.m. And notice here, if I did need to change the date, I could do that here as well. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this as the 20th. Now, if I were actually in the patient's home doing this at the time of the visit, then the preferred method is, rather than setting the dates manually here, is to use the set button, to use the current time to set the start time. And then when I'm done with the assessment in the patient's home, I click the set button here to set the end time. This will also stamp the GPS location of where I'm located at the moment when I click the set button, either the set to start and the set to end, or both. You don't need to put in the alternate discipline on a normal basis. That's only if you are a worker who has multiple disciplines and you're doing an unscheduled visit, which is a rare occurrence. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and click Next, which will take us into the meat of the assessment, the actual clinical contents. And so we choose homebound status and the discipline. Notice how when I choose these items, I don't have to click inside the little tiny squares. I can just click anywhere on the text and that automatically selects it for me or unselects it for me. And then as soon as I've entered my selections there, I click Next to take me to the next screen. And now as soon as you click Next, that automatically saves the page that you are working on. So you don't have to worry about losing your data. Matter of fact, if you were to drop your device into the toilet, as soon as you click Next, then it's already registered in the back office on the server and is available for anybody who wants to look at, who has the privileges to look at this assessment. Let me make a couple more points here about some options that are available. Notice that there's what we call a margin note or a clip note icon next to each of the questions, and that allows you to put in further information about that patient's situation. So you can click on that and then you just type in, "This is some additional information." All right, notice that changes the red icon to blue to indicate that there's some text that you've entered behind that, and that will actually show up on the printed report once you print out the OASIS assessment in the back office. All right, also if you change an item, for example, if I were to uncheck shortness of breath and change it instead to bedbound and then click Next, that saves my new information. Then if I come back and I click on this back arrow or history arrow, then it's going to show me a history of what was changed and what the original values were. So I see that originally it was shortness of breath and chairbound, but then it changed to bedbound and chairbound as of 12/18 by user T. Bell. So that allows you to have a history on what was changed, not only within this assessment, but within any prior visit notes for that same patient. You'll have a full history going back in time all the way to the beginning for that patient. There's also help bubbles available for many of the questions to tell you, to wave your mouse over so that you can see any information you need to know on how to fill that out. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next, and as you recall, I mentioned that when doing the intake, we chose unknown for the race. This is the same set of questions that were available during the patient intake that are now available to the start of care nurse for the patient demographic. So instead of unknown, I'm going to choose white, and I can make any other adjustments that I need to make as I review the items in the list. There's also an option to see directions for the patient. If I click on this link here, it's going to show directions. Now for this particular patient, we're going from the office to the patient's home. And so it tells you that it's going to be a 23-minute drive, 17.5 miles. If I'd like, I can highlight the actual directions, right-click, copy. Let me just close this window, and then I can paste that in to the patient's record. Maybe do some cleanup here, so you kind of get the idea. All right, I'm just going to keep that clean and move forward. You can review the start of care date and the verbal start of care date that's going to show on the 45, which defaults to the same start of care date. Now the physician face-to-face encounter date is available, but it's not required. As you can see, there's no asterisk next to it, whereas there is for the start of care date. This would typically be filled out by somebody in the back office, but if the point of care user knows it, they can go ahead and fill it out at that point. There's no pharmacies on file for this agency, but we'll go ahead and put in Walgreens here. So you can freeform it, or you can pick from a list that is non-existent in this case, but you can go ahead and put in effective date, whatever the date might be. That's not required, it's just informational. You can put additional pharmacies if you wish for that patient. Again, all that is just informational. I'm going to choose to skip the emergency contact. We're just going to rifle through this assessment as quickly as we can. We'll just put in some dates. The temperature you're going to choose, starting with, in this list, you can choose from a list, but the starting point is the 98s. And then after 98s, it goes from 94 up to 104 or 5. So we're going to choose 98.6. Temperature method is oral. Blood pressure 120 over 80, and you can choose a position. Respiration rate, again from the pick list, and pulse. You can say actual or stated. Height. Now the height and some of the other questions are going to carry forward automatically from one visit note or assessment to the next. So just to be aware of that feature. If there are some questions that you wish to carry forward that are not carrying forward, let us know, and vice versa. If there are some that are carrying forward that you don't want to carry forward from one visit note to the next, we can modify that for you. Let's choose Medicare for this, the patient payer sources. And we're going to choose NA. And for the M1016, we're going to choose congestive heart failure to just search. You can either search by diagnosis code or by description. So there's only one CHF in the system, so it automatically put that in for us at 428.0. And we're going to choose some other items here, just kind of rifle through diagnoses. These are our main diagnoses for the patient, not the inpatient diagnoses. So at the time of referral, time of intake, we're going to put in CHF. Notice how it zeroes in there for us. Or we could have chosen 428 if we knew that. If we don't know what the code is, we can go ahead and put in a free-form diagnosis and say congestive heart failure. And if the point of care clinician, if Tinkerbell is not a coder, this is the route that she would do. She would go ahead and put it in here. And then somebody in the back office, once Tinkerbell submits the assessment to the back office, that coder in the back office is actually going to clear this out and put the correct code in the diagnosis area. I'm going to choose a severity of 1. Onset. The 20th is the start of care date, so we'll use that as the as of date. So notice how when I save this, there's no code here, but there is a description. Now the coder in the back office could come to this same spot and go ahead and click edit, and then we'll clear this out and we'll type in CHF and we'll choose that. Let's go ahead and put one more diagnosis in. 496 is COPD. We're going to choose a severity of 2, onset, save. Now we've got 2 diagnoses for this patient. I want to point out something important. If you did need to delete one of these items, you would have to click Show All Columns. And that exposes a number of different options, including the delete column, so that you can click on the link and it will delete that row. or you can move an item up so that it becomes the primary diagnosis. Notice that the primary diagnosis is congestive heart failure, but if I click up on this one, then the code 496 COPD becomes the primary one. If you have multiple items in the list, a lot of different diagnoses, you can use the two top or the two bottom to send it all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom. Also, if you put in a V code, then you'll be prompted to put in a case mix diagnosis, one or two diagnoses, and those will show up here. Once you're done looking at the advanced features here, you can click hide extra columns to give you a more compact view. So we're just going to go next and slide through our assessment. Some of these, again, are OASIS questions, and some are 45 questions that will show up on the 45 when you print it out. Got some history you can put in. You can also put in immunizations. Let's put in January 1st. So you can do the same for pneumonia and so forth. You can put in allergies. So what you do is you just scroll through the list and pick the items that you want, or you could say your own diagnosis, like peanuts. Your own free-form allergies that you can put in. It works the same way with safety measures. You can put in safety measures that you'd like to show up on the 45. Primary caregiver, let's say no to that, and we're going to click next and just quickly get through this assessment. And based on your answer to certain questions, you'll see that certain questions will be skipped. So if you say diabetic, you'll not be prompted for all the diabetic type questions. Here's a pain list. You can have up to 4 pain locations, and you can choose a location from the list. It's a predefined list, but it's organized from the top of your head to the bottom of your toe. And so if you have a pain in the midsection, you would scroll down about halfway through and maybe click on abdomen. You could put in the start date and the current pain, the worst pain, the least. Put in interventions, whatever is appropriate. You can choose, yes, it does indicate severe pain, that you've done a standardized pain assessment. This qualifies as a standardized pain assessment. Braden, let's go ahead and do that. Braden pressure score risk screen. So this allows you to choose items related to pressure ulcers, and then it will calculate the risk. The patient score in this case is 12 based on the items that I chose. So this patient has a moderate risk. Was this patient assessed for risk of developing pressure ulcers? And I can say yes, using a standard tool, the Braden. Does this patient have a risk of developing pressure ulcers? And the answer is yes, moderate risk. And we're just going to choose no for the pressure ulcers so we can get through this more quickly, but it'll just take you through. Okay, and then you can put in wounds if you'd like. Let's go ahead and click new entry here and specify incision. And again, this is the same location list that we saw for the pain. So if we scroll down, we can choose, for example, abdomen again. And we can choose the shape, linear, maybe it's non-stageable. And say the length is in centimeters, so say 5 centimeters, and the width is going to be maybe 0.4 centimeter, and the depth 0.2. Drainage amount. And so all this other information is optional. We can click save, and so that we have our first wound here, and if we'd like, we can click on the attachment to add a photograph. And if you have an iPad or an Android device, when you go into here, it will allow you to take a picture, but in this case I'm going to browse to choose the actual image. So I'm going to go into pictures, and I'm going to choose this one here. It's not on the abdomen, but you get the idea, and you could put a note if you'd like, and you click upload, and then click OK. Return. And so now, before this used to be just a camera, now it has a camera with an image behind it indicating that there is something there. So if I click on it, I can see what that image is associated with that particular wound on that particular date. Now if you were to put in a healed date down here at the bottom, that would mean that this wound would not carry forward into subsequent visit notes. But if I leave this open, then the basic wound information is going to carry forward to the next visit note so that I can document the attributes of that wound at that time. So I can continue to add new wounds, new entry for as many wounds as I would like. And click Next. And we'll continue working our way through the assessment. Some of these you can actually choose a value from the drop down, or if it's one of these that has a vertical line here, it means you can actually modify it. So I can just type in freeform. Again, we have edema with standard body locations. I'm going to choose left leg. If you're doing the assessment on the same day as you're visiting the patient and their bowel movement was on that day, you can just click today and that will put today's date in the date box. Looks like I didn't go down far enough here, and it's requiring me to put some more values in these required questions. If 1620 is 0 through 5, then 1630 must be 0. So sometimes you'll come into rules that will prevent you from moving forward. But let's find 1630. One from each row here. Let's go ahead and do a fall risk assessment. This is the Mach 10 Missouri Fall Risk Assessment, Missouri Alliance for Home Care. And it just tallies up the points based on the options you choose here. Notice here the total fall risk score is 5, and it's red indicating that the score is more than 4, meaning that the patient is at risk for falling. You're going to say yes here. Yes, and it does indicate a risk for falls. See option 0. Next we come to the area where we can put in medications for the patient. So I'm going to start with amitriptyline, and you can move your cursor down or move the arrows down to select the variant of the drug that you would like. You can also type in a partial, and I can press enter to have it automatically advance to the next item. And then I choose my strength and press enter, and it automatically puts in the route for me. And I'm optionally can choose a purpose, start date, daily, and if I'm changing the drug I can put in a change date and or an end date and comments. The primary physician is automatically included, administered by self or other options you can put in. You can type your own option in there. Next I'm going to put in fluconazole, and I'll choose oral pill, which automatically advances me to the strength, and then I can choose again the start date. If I choose this arrow here, that brings up the start date. If I put my cursor inside the date field, it brings up a pop-up which I can use to choose the date. And so I'll leave the rest of these blank. Now I can continue to add as many medications as I would like, and as I tab down it will automatically add new rows for me. At this point, now that I've entered a couple of interacting drugs, I can check those drug interactions for the entire list. If I've added 2 or 20, doesn't matter how many I've added, I can check the drug interactions for that combination of drugs for that patient by clicking this button here that says check drug interactions for patient's current medications. And it tells me with a severity of 4, which is on a scale of 1 through 5 is a high severity, and it's highlighted in yellow to indicate that the severity is high. If it were a severity number 5, it would show the severity in red. If it's severity 3 or below, it would not show any specific color because the severity is considered not as urgent. You can also print the meds and interactions directly from here and bring up a PDF document showing the medications with the allergies and pharmacy, and then if you scroll down to the second page you'll see the interactions. All right, now I can click next to go to the next page, and this will allow me to provide a disclaimer that will show up on the med sheet when it's printed out subsequently if I choose all of these options to say there are no issues with the patient's medications. DMA and supplies. I need to keep scrolling down apparently to M2100. One option I missed here. I can also put in supplies. So I'm going to just choose an ACE wrap and say the quantity is 3. And each supply can be associated with a particular visit. I can choose today's date, or I can put in the date of the visit. And I can click save and then keep adding new ones by clicking new entry if I prefer. If I'm on the field and I'm a skilled nurse and I don't know how many therapy visits are going to be required for the patient for the episode, I can skip this in the field and that will not be counted against me if I don't answer it on the field, but it will need to be answered by somebody in the back office before the assessment can be validated and transmitted. So I'm going to just say yes to this for now. I'm going to assume that there are 0 therapy visits, and then I can put in the plan of care synopsis. Scroll down, answer any remaining questions. TB screen. If the patient requires home health aid services, I'm going to go ahead and say yes to this. So that will allow me to specify as a skilled nurse what the home health aides are going to be required to do throughout the episode for the patient's needs. Notify nurse if the temperature is greater than 102, pulse greater than 75, and so forth. Now here's the core of the directives for the home health aide. I can choose every visit or every week or not applicable. So for every visit I'm going to require a bed bath, A for tub, and let's say this is going to be partial here. You can put instructions inside the boxes optionally if you wish. Every week. So these items will show up for the home health aide, and she'll be prompted to document against these items, assuming that you've entered a value other than NA for each of those items, or for any of those items. Well, let's go ahead and ask for the date of last BM in every visit. Just going to go down quickly through those, specify 3 days. This option here is to allow you to provide responses to an OASIS C process tracking sheet. This is optional, but I recommend that you do use this option in order to document falls and medications and so forth that you'll need to document when it comes time to enter the transfer or discharge assessment for the patient. So, has the patient been diagnosed with congestive heart failure? Yes. And then you can put in various options in response to that. Diabetes? No. Experienced a fall? Yes. So you can document these events, and it makes it easier for you later on when you're discharging the patient or transferring the patient out of the agency. This next page is what is referred to as the care plan and orders page, and is probably the most important and complex of all of the forms in CarePortal. So I'm going to dwell a little bit on this particular form. Let us start with the disciplines tab on the left-hand side. The reason it went to problems is because typically the discipline skilled nursing has already been established and is ready for you to begin putting in problems, goals, and interventions. But if you have not already established the discipline by choosing the initial discipline in the admission form during the intake process, then you'll need to click New Discipline to add the skilled nursing or the PT or whatever other disciplines may be necessary for this patient. If you want to add PT at any time, you can come here and click New Discipline and choose a PT from the Discipline tab. Otherwise, let's go ahead and advance to the Frequencies tab. So notice up here at the top, it's telling us that discipline SN is the currently selected discipline. So anytime you change the discipline in the Discipline tab, it changes up here, and then furthermore, any of the other tabs that you advance to will be related to that particular discipline. So we have a frequency set that's already in place starting on January 20th, the start of care date. If there had not been an existing frequency set in place, we could click New Frequency Set to establish the new frequency. This would also work for a supplemental order if you needed to change the frequencies in the middle of an episode. All right, so we can see on this mini calendar that the 20th of January is the beginning of the CERT period, and the 20th of March is the end of the CERT period, as indicated by this yellow highlight over the bracket. We'll go ahead and do 3 times a week as far into the episode as we can in this case. So let's do 3 times a week for the first 8 weeks, because we have 8 full weeks plus 1 partial week, the 9th week. We know how many calendar weeks there are to account for by looking at the red numeral here, which in this case is 9. So there's 9 weeks in this CERT period. So we'll do 3 times a week for 8 weeks, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. These dates can be adjusted easily later on. We're just putting placeholders in for now. And in this final week, let's do Tuesday and Thursday, since the episode ends on a Thursday. So for 1 week, 2 times a week for 1 week, we're going to do Tuesday and Thursday. We can also assign a worker, and let's assign all of these to Tinkerbell. For example, we could start with one day being one worker and then the subsequent days being a different worker. I'll show you in the Refiner tab how you can make this change to us. For example, if you have a licensed practical nurse, an LPN, who does most of the visits in between, you could have a full RN do the visits, do the first and final visits. So 2 times a week for 1 week and the last week, and let's go ahead and say Tinkerbell also for that. And once we've established the frequencies, now let me step back for a second and say that depending on the permissions that you grant your point of care nurses, they may or may not be able to do the actual scheduling. They can put in the frequencies here. All clinicians can put in frequencies, but only ones that have been assigned the scheduler role can actually click this button to generate the scheduled visits on the calendar based on the frequency information that has been established in this area here. So I'm going to click Auto Create, and that should generate 3 times a week for 8 weeks. And you can see these gray highlighted dates that indicate that those dates have been scheduled for skilled nursing for this patient. You could also put in a certain number of PRN visits. Let's say if you wanted to do 2 PRN visits for change catheter. Once you're done putting in the frequencies, you can advance to the calendar. And you can see that we have a blue visit here, blue meaning that this visit has already been established or has been started to be documented. You can click on this color key to see what these colors mean. This is a blue visit, which is an actual visit that's already been started or fully entered. And that happens to be the start of care that we're right in the middle of working on right now. Red means that it's a scheduled visit, but that it's overdue. It's in the past. And green means that it's current or in the future. If I wish, I could move visits around using the action option here. I clicked on the button that said Show Operation Options, and I can use this to launch into existing visits to document them, or I can add new visits manually. I can add a PRN visit if I wish. Let's go ahead and add a PRN visit. So I'm going to choose Add PRN from the drop-down, and I'm going to choose a worker to whom those PRN visits are going to be assigned. And let's go ahead and stick one in here on Tuesday. It tells me there's a PRN visit there. It says PRN. And if I put another one here, that's my second PRN visit. But look what happens if I try to add a third one. It tells me I'm not able to do that because, as you recall, we had put in 2 PRN visits in our orders. And you can also see up here, you can reference here that there's 2 PRN visits that have been ordered. Here is a summary of the frequencies that we had put in on the Frequencies tab, 3 times a week for 8 weeks, and so forth. Now, one other thing before we leave the frequencies, let me go ahead and save by clicking the Submit button. There is a special visit here. The dark green visit indicates that this is a scheduled recert visit because it's the first visit within the last 5 days of the episode. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is within the 5-day end of episode window. This is the first visit, and so it's marked automatically as a recert assessment. And you can see that in the notes when I hover the mouse over that the top of that visit. Let me go back to the frequencies. If you don't like the way this frequency is displayed, you can always say, put in your own freeform frequency, like 3 week 8, 2 week 1. And that's what will show up on the 45 instead of the automatically generated verbiage that CarePortal provides. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that you do this. I recommend using whatever is down here because then there'll be a direct correspondence between what you've actually put in there and what actually shows on your 45. So if you put your own verbiage in here and then later on you came and changed this down here, then it would not automatically reflect here and you would be off on your 45. But by putting this in, you can see what happens when I go back to the calendar. It's going to refresh and say 3 week 8, 2 week 1, which will use the freeform frequency that I defined manually in the Frequencies tab over here. All right, let's go to the Schedule Refiner, and here we can make changes or adjustments to each of the scheduled visits, and you can put in instructions, special instructions for each of those visits if you prefer. For example, if you're going to send a different worker out for the second visit, maybe it's going to be Peter Pan, you could put in something like beware of the dog. Because maybe Peter Pan doesn't yet know that there's a dog at the patient's home. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to Tinkerbell for now. But as you can see, you can scroll down the list and change the worker who's assigned to each of these visits and put in notes, maybe change catheter. Then you can, without clicking Save, it automatically saves for you when you advance to another tab. I can go to Problems, and this will give me a list of the available problems that I can define for the patient. The problems themselves do not show on the 485, but the problems do allow you to categorize your goals and your interventions and help you zero in on the goals and interventions that pertain to the particular problems the patient has. So, for example, we see that CHF and COPD float to the top of this list because those problems are linked to the patient's diagnoses, which we had chosen earlier. So let's choose CHF. So that's our first problem. And once you choose a problem, it shows down here and is highlighted in yellow. Now I'm going to go to Goals, and this informs me that the goal library for problem congestive heart failure is available. So I can choose as many of these items as I wish. And notice as I click them, they push down here to the list for the specific patient that I'm working on. And if you continue to add more items, they'll scroll down below the bottom of the visible area on your screen. So sometimes first-time users will end up clicking twice or 3 times and say, what happened? Where is it? Well, you just have to know to scroll down and see that they're being added more than one time. If you do end up having duplicates, you can always click the X button here to remove the duplicates. Now, if you wish, you can go ahead and modify any of these by clicking simply within the box, and it brings up a blank screen with the item that you chose. and then you can put in whatever modifications you wish within 3 weeks, or whatever you would like to say. Then when you're done, you press enter. Now, if you would like to put in a second line, you can press shift enter. This will allow me to put in a second line. And then I press enter, and that takes me back, and I can see at the bottom here there's a second line for that particular goal. So these are my goals for congestive heart failure, and I could advance to interventions as well and put in some interventions. Just choose a couple of these. So we got 3 of these, and you can modify any of these. You can also choose an other intervention. For example, if you choose this one here, or any one for that matter, you can click on it and then say, clear that out and say my own intervention. So you can either choose from a predefined item in the list, or you can just choose one that says other intervention and then modify it to suit your own needs. Alright, so that's for congestive heart failure. Now if I go back to my problems list, I've only got one problem so far. I can add another problem, for example COPD, and notice how it's my second problem in the list is highlighted in yellow. I can highlight back and forth. If I wanted to highlight congestive heart failure, that would mean that if I went back to goals and interventions, it would remain on congestive heart failure. But if I choose this gray box to choose COPD, then my goals and problems will relate to COPD, as you can see here in this list. So we'll put in a couple more goals for COPD, a couple of interventions. All right, and if I wish, I can also move these up and down with respect to each other. You can see that there's an up arrow, down arrow, all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. If I only need to perform a particular intervention 1 or 2 times, then by the time you do the second visit or the third visit, whichever one is the last one that you need to do for the patient, you can always put an end date in there, and this will not continue to flow forward from one visit note to the next. Now I should back up and mention that each of these interventions that you choose will show on the 485, but not only will they show on the 485, but they will carry forward into subsequent visit notes, and the clinician will be forced to document or chart against those interventions for each visit for which they are active until the end date is selected, and they will no longer continue carrying forward. So the beauty of this, the way this works, is that whatever is put on the 485, whatever interventions are chosen at the start of care or the research time, will be presented to the nurse, the LPN, or whatever nurse is doing the daily visits, so that that nurse can then chart against them. And we'll see that in just a second. You can even chart against those interventions within the assessment itself, because oftentimes those interventions will be performed during the start of care assessment. Before we do that, I'm just going to go to one last tab here, the Care Plan and Orders tab, and this will allow us to see visually what is going to be put in box 21 and 22 of the 485 based on the interventions that we've chosen for skilled nursing and the goals for skilled nursing. You can also see this hierarchically if you choose not the 485 but the Care Plan mode. This will present the discipline followed by the goals and for congestive heart failure. So we've got congestive heart failure goals and congestive heart failure interventions, followed by COPD goals and COPD interventions. So that allows you to see that hierarchically, followed by just a raw list of goals for that patient. Now if you wanted to do the same for therapy, you would come over to disciplines, you would add PT, then you'd proceed to add your problems and your goals and interventions. Typically those might be done by the therapist himself when he does the eval, and those will then also show up on the 485, provided that you haven't locked down the 485 prior to the eval being done. 485 can be locked down by signing the 485 or sending off the 485 to the physician. Alright, so we're still going through our assessment, and I'm going to click Next. Now it's giving us a chance to say, okay, well, we're about to present the intervention log, the list of interventions that you need to document against for this particular assessment visit. If you haven't fully established what interventions are going to be done for this patient, then you need to say no to this right now, because as soon as you say yes, it's going to lock in the interventions that you've already established in the care plan. I'm going to assume that I'm done with these interventions and setting them up for the 485, so I'm going to click yes. And that's going to give me a list of the interventions that I specified in the care plan form just a few minutes ago. You can recognize this when it says my own intervention. The idea here is that you need to pay attention to each of these interventions, and you need to either indicate that they're performed or assessed and instructed. So either one of these two columns has to be marked off to say that you've carried out that directive, or you have to say reason no action. Why did you not do that intervention? So for a couple of these I'm going to put in performed or assessed, but I'm going to skip this one here, for example, and see what happens if I don't document that I either performed or assessed or instructed, and that I did not indicate why I did not do either of those. So I'm just going to choose those items here. I'm going to say test for this and test for this. And if I click finish here, it's going to say error, a reason no action is required for each intervention that was not performed or assessed. So this is the culprit here, and I can specify perhaps the patient was not ready. All right. If optionally I can include progress toward goal, I could say fair understanding, frequently demonstrated, and so forth. Or I can type in my own values in here if I don't find what I'm looking for. I can also put in comments. And if this is the last time that I need to perform this intervention, I can put an end date in there, and that will automatically terminate that intervention so it does not continue carrying forward to subsequent notes. All right, at this point, let me mention here, I can click finish. This is the last question in this particular start of care assessment. So when I click finish, that makes it so that I'm done with the assessment, and I can send it now if I wish. Not quite yet. The finish is just telling the system that I'm done. But if I click finish and I have not answered all the questions that need to be answered, it will not let me click finish. If I do want to review what I've done, I can click navigate, and this will allow me to jump to a particular category to review that category. These are there's 21 high-level categories for the start of care assessment, but if I want to zero in on a particular item within that category, for example my vital signs, so I can jump specifically to respiration rate or weight. I can jump to, here's my diagnoses, patient history and diagnoses. If I want to jump straight to the diagnosis form, I can do that. And so there it is. I can make changes to it, and I can click next, and then I can click nav. And if I scroll down to the bottom of this nav list and I click the plus sign to expand, I can then click additional comments and findings. Notice that if it's a yellow highlight, that means I haven't stepped through that particular page. That means I have not answered all the questions there yet, and I need to make sure all the questions are answered before I can finalize the assessment. Now, this is showing just the top level categories, but if I click expand all, it's going to give me the entire list of questions in the assessment. And so I can zero in on exactly the particular question that I want to jump to if I want to review that and make changes. Now, you may be overwhelmed the first time you see this list, and you may say, well, I don't know where to find a particular item. Well, you can always, on your browser, on your keyboard, you can press Control F, and you can then type, for example, M2200 if you want to jump straight to M2200. And so you can say, are you ready to enter projected therapy visit count? And I can say yes, next, and maybe I want to change that to 1 or 2 or whatever, how many visits I want to put in there, maybe 14. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and click navigate, and navigate again to the end of the assessment and the very last question here, and then I'm going to click finish, and it's going to check for completeness to make sure everything is completed before I am able to proceed with the final step of submitting this assessment to the back office. Now, any point along the way, I could have, either before or after completing the assessment, I could have clicked on this patient signature button. And so let's go ahead and do this now. As long as the assessment has been saved for the first time, even before you click next to go in and answer all the questions in the assessment, then you can click the patient signature button, and that will allow you to capture that patient signature. Now, just to orient you, perhaps it's been so long since we were on this page, this again was the first page that we encountered when we first selected the visit from the calendar to do the start of care visit. This is the first page where you indicate the time and so forth for the visit. But when that information is put in and when the assessment has been saved for the first time, you can capture the patient's signature. And in order to do that, you just hand your tablet over to the patient or your touchscreen device, and the patient can sign it here, like PA, patient. And you'll click Save and then Return. And then at any point you can review the signature by clicking the patient's signature. If they didn't like how they put it in, you can always clear it and start again. We can also print the assessment. We can print the 45 if we wish we can click the 45 if we wish by going to the patient information. This will take us to the patient chart, and we can see there's a start of care here as an assessment, but then there's also the 45 to go along with it. So the 45 is paired up with the start of care that we just got through entering. And if you wish to print the 45, you can click this link here, and that will bring up the 45 printout. We'll go ahead and make that larger so we can view that. And so you can review the 45 in the back office or in the point of care, either way, and print it off if you wish. You can also click on the Start of Care Oasis link that will bring up the full Oasis document. So here's the integrated Oasis and 45 and clinical information, and you can scroll down and see that there's 17 pages in this particular start of care. If we had not put in some of the options like the Oasis C tracking sheet, it might have been shorter. So you can review that, and what we'll do now is we're going to go back home, and now that we've reviewed the assessment, we didn't have to review that in the way that I showed you, but I just wanted to demonstrate how you could get to the patient's chart and see both the 45 and the Oasis. Now that we've created the start of care and we've completed the entry of the start of care, we have still not yet submitted it to the back office. So in terms of the chart that we had been looking at, we are finished with the Oasis assessment, but now we're going to submit it to the back office from the point of care. But in order to do that, we have to go back and access that document again. And it's available in My Open Documents because it has not yet been submitted to the back office. So if I click on My Open Documents, I'm going to see that in my list. And you want to keep this list as clean as possible so that over time you don't have a lot of open documents that are yet to be turned into the back office. So we're going to go ahead and click the Submit button. The first thing it's going to do is going to give us a chance to review some of the OBQI issues that may be in place. Now you'll notice when I filled out the assessment, I didn't take any particular care to make my answers consistent. So it's finding, using the OBQI checks that are in place, it's finding a number of potential inconsistencies. None of these are fatal, but if I did want to clean them up, then I could go back into the assessment, use the Next. If I click Cancel, then if I wanted to make any changes, I would click Next, and I would use the Navigate that I just got through showing you to be able to jump to any of those items and make corrections to them. So without further ado, I'm going to click Submit again, and I'm going to just review the start time and end time, and to my satisfaction. I'm going to click OK. And then it did find one issue that it's going to prevent me from submitting this to the back office, and that issue is that all of my M1300, 1322, 1340, 1350, those all indicate I don't have any wounds, but I did put a wound in the system, so it's finding an inconsistency that it's not going to accept. So I'm going to click Return. I'm going to jump to 1350. So I'm going to click Navigate. Let's go ahead and expand that in the wound section here. 1350. I'm going to say yes to that. And that's going to make it so it's now consistent. I'm going to save and exit. And I'm going to submit again and click OK. Alright, now it's telling me that I just have a simple warning. Physician NPI 123456789 is not found in the PICOS database. Normally in the real world, if you did have this, you should pay attention to it, but since I'm doing a sample, we're going to go ahead and ignore this. It's telling us that the document was successfully submitted to the back office. So now it's telling me that I'm not able to make any changes to it because it's been submitted. This would be similar to you turning in, if you're a student, turning in your homework to the teacher. You can't make any changes to your document, to your homework, after you've already turned it in to the teacher. Now, if the teacher wanted to hand it back to you and to make corrections, that's their prerogative. But as soon as you submit it to the teacher or to the back office, they own it, and you can no longer make changes to it. So at this point, we've submitted the start of care assessment to the back office. If I go home, before I shift back to back office, I'm going to show one more thing in point of care. If I go to my open documents, it's empty because I've submitted my open assessment and it's now no longer open. So if I did want to find my submitted document, I could go into my submitted documents list view, and I could see that assessment is there and accessible, but I'm not able to make changes to it because it has been submitted to the back office. All right, at this point I'm going to sign out of point of care. I was operating as user Tinkerbell in point of care to do the start of care assessment. Now I'm going to go back to user Peter Pan in the back office. And I'm going to go into clinical, and I see that there's a Captain Hook there, and I could go into that patient's record to see the patient. Or if I would like to see a global view of all assessments that are a work in progress that need to have some action performed, whether to be validated or sent to the state or billed, I can go into the work in progress documents area. And this is like a dashboard that lets me see all of the assessments and visit notes. In this case, I'm looking at the unsigned and unvalidated assessments. I can go ahead and validate directly from here if I wish, and that would prepare it to be sent off to the state and also for the RAP to be generated. We do have a user guide entry that explains this, this dashboard in much more detail. For our purposes now, we're just going to zero in on Captain Hook. So I'm going to go into that patient's record, and I see that that assessment is in the chart for this particular patient. And if I want to make changes to that assessment, I can go ahead and do that using the edit button here. If I do find that there are problems with the assessment, I can check this checkbox that says owned by remote user, and if I do that, then it will give me the option of sending a what's called a hot list message back to the point of care user to indicate what the problems are that they need to correct. But if I print the assessment and I view it and I determine there's no problems with it, I can go ahead at this point and validate the assessment. The validation is the prerequisite for continuing to do any other operation like transmit it to the state or perform the RAP. So I'm going to go ahead and validate this. The other thing that this is going to do is going to set the patient's status to be changed from pre-admit to admit. So this is in place of checking the confirmed checkbox that I mentioned earlier when we did the admission. So it'll automatically check that confirmed status for the admission and make that patient change from pre-admit to admit. Now that the assessment has been validated, I'm no longer able to change the assessment. But if I did want to make further changes to it, I could go ahead and click the unvalidate. Now, as a result of validating the assessment, the other thing that happened was that a notice went out to the clinician saying that the assessment is now ready to be signed. If I had not validated the assessment yet, then the clinician would not have been able to sign that document electronically. So it's the act of validating that causes it to be opened up. And I want to illustrate that by signing out again of the back office from Peter Pan and going back into Tinkerbell as a point of care user. In order to illustrate this cycle that I'm mentioning here, I can click on the guide link up here. That will take us to the user guide, and in the user guide is a very important document called the OASIS Assessment Status Flow, and this is going to give us a flow chart that I can open up, and I can see what is required to get through this assessment. So if you start the assessment in the point of care, which is what we've done, you'll follow this particular route. The assessment can be entered initially in the back office, which is not the normal route, but if you have a clinician that does not have a point of care device or is not able to access a computer to enter the assessment themselves, then you can do the assessment for them in the back office. So by looking at the yellow highlight here, we can see what the status of each of these assessments is, or the assessment is, as it flows from one step to the next. So it starts out as incomplete in the point of care, or open. Then when it's finished, it becomes complete. Then when the user, point of care user, Tinkerbell, submits it, then it comes over here into the back office. The QA staff reviews it and or makes changes. If they decide to send it back to the point of care user, they can use the Owned by Remote User checkbox, and that will send it back to the point of care user with a hot list message indicating that corrections need to be made. And then the point of care user will make those corrections, click submit, and the cycle will resume. Now once it's all clean, then it can be approved as is, and the user will then in the back office validate that like we just showed you. If there are no errors, and there were none in the case that we just demonstrated, then the assessment becomes validated. Now, when the assessment is validated, a hot list message is sent to the clinician in the point of care requesting them to sign the OASIS. So let's go ahead and go back to the point of care now and see if we can follow that sequence. So I'm going to go back out, log out of point of care, sign out, and log back in as Tinkerbell. And notice it's telling us using a system message that says, please sign the start of care for 1/20/2014 for Captain Hook. So that's our notice, our hot list message notice. And in order to do that, we can either go into my submitted documents and see the ones that we've submitted, or to get straighter to the point, we can go to my dashboard, which is going to give us a list of unsigned 45s, unsigned assessments, and open hot list messages that we haven't yet read, or that we have not closed out. So let's go to the unsigned assessments here. And it says this assessment may not be edited because it has been submitted. We can't edit the actual contents, but we can actually sign it. So we're going to click Sign Assessment. And it's going to load the full contents of the assessment on the screen for us. And we should, if we're a responsible clinician, we should review it, go down the list of all the questions that are there, make sure it's all to our liking. And I'm going to go down to the very bottom now, and I'm going to just see there's a signature line at the bottom here that has not yet been signed, but there's a button at the top here that says Sign as Tinkerbell, RN, with an effective date, which is today's date. So when I click the button to sign as Tinkerbell, RN, it asks me to click OK to proceed. It says the document was successfully signed, and it shows that it was authenticated and electronically signed by Tinkerbell, RN on 1/26/2014. I can click back, and I'll notice that the assessment is not editable by me or by Tinkerbell for two reasons. One, because it has been submitted to the back office, and the other because it has been signed. Now, if the back office chose to return it back to me in a point of care, and if I clicked Unsign Assessment, then I would be able to edit the assessment again and then re-sign it and resubmit it. In addition to signing the assessment, I would like to also sign the 485. So let's go back to the flowchart. And in this flowchart, we see that the assessment was validated, which caused a message to be sent to the point of care clinician indicating they needed to sign the assessment, the OASIS assessment. We went into the dashboard in the point of care, we found the document there, the OASIS, and then we selected it and clicked Sign to sign the assessment, which now makes it ready to be transmitted. But there's a parallel track here where you see these reddish, pinkish boxes indicating the 485 track. So if there's a 485 associated with an OASIS, for example, if it's a start of care or a recert, but probably not a transfer or discharge, in those cases you're going to have a 485 associated with the OASIS, and there's a very similar process involved, and you can do these at essentially the same time. we didn't show how when we validated the OASIS we could have also confirmed the 485 at around the same time. So we're going to go back into the back office and show how you can confirm that 485 along with the assessment when it's been validated. So you can either do this before or after the validation. It doesn't much matter unless you, as an agency, have a policy that the 485 has to be confirmed before the OASIS can be validated, in which case you'll let us know and we can set it up that way for you to force the 485 to be confirmed before the OASIS is validated. In any case, once the 485 has been confirmed, it sends a message to the point of care user indicating they need to sign the 485, and they go ahead and sign it from the dashboard just like they did for the OASIS itself, and then that allows it, frees it up, be able to be sent to the physician at that point. So let's go ahead and check that out in CarePortal. Let's go into the back office again. As Peter Pan. And we're going to select the start of care for Captain Hook. Notice that the start of care is editable here within the chart, but it's also available within the 485. It doesn't matter which one you choose it from, because you can see that there's a confirm button here. Remember that we validated the OASIS itself, but we did not yet confirm the 485. Again, we could have done these at essentially the same time, but I'm showing them as a separate process just to highlight the one and then the other. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm, and it says it's been confirmed. And notice that it's not editable any longer because everything's been confirmed and or validated. But we can now return back to the point of care as Tinkerbell and see what happens. T-Bell. Notice that Tinkerbell receives a message indicating she needs to sign the 485 for Captain Hook. So we're going to close that and go into My Dashboard, where we see that there's an unsigned 485 that needs to be taken care of. So we're going to click that to select it, and notice that we have the options to unsign the assessment, which we had previously signed, or we can sign the 485, which is what we're wanting to do now. So we're going to sign the 485. We can see how it looks and verify that it's correct. And when we're satisfied that it's correct, we can go ahead and click Sign as Tinkerbell, RN. And we see the authenticated and electronically signed by user Tinkerbell. So now the 485 is not editable any longer along with everything else because the OASIS has been signed, the 485 has been signed, and it's owned by the back office. So at this point, we're going to take a look at our flow chart again. We see that everything has been done, including signing the OASIS, signing the 485, and we're going to go back into the back office and show how you would mark the 485 as having been transmitted to the physician. So let's go ahead and sign in as a back office user, Peter Pan. And we're going to go to Captain Hook. And notice that we are in the Chart tab, which shows assessments and visits. So if we want to see the 485 details or the supplemental order details, then we can go to this tab here, 45/supplemental order, and we can then go into the tracking link where we see that the clinician's sign date has been entered. So the 485 is locked down once any of these dates have been entered. The clinician's sign date was automatically stamped in here to indicate the day on which the 485 was electronically signed by the clinician. Now, if you're going to be mailing out the 485, you also want to record the date on which you mail out the 485. You could put 1/27/2014 or whatever appropriate date you want to put in there. Also, you can put in a fax date. Now, if you like, if you're using the built-in CarePortal faxing feature, you can automatically fax it directly from CarePortal, and that will automatically fill in that fax sent date for you. If you fax it outside of CarePortal, then you'll need to manually put that date in yourself using the tracking link that's available just here. All right, so if you want to fax it, I'll just illustrate very briefly how this would work. you can click on this little envelope icon, and then it will default to the physician, the primary physician for the patient, and it will put the fax number in for that physician. Then you can put in some notes like, please sign and return. And then you click send and it goes off. In this case, I'm just going to return. Just wanted to illustrate how that works. All right. Back on our flowchart, we see that the 45 has been sent, and the assessment is now ready to be transmitted. So let's return back to the back office. And if you're an administrative user, you can go into the workflow area, and one of the options in the workflow menu is to create batches of OASIS assessments. So we're going to click create batches. For our dates, we're going to choose all. We could choose last 30 days or specify a date filter. But what this will do is it will give you a list of all of the validated assessments, ones for which you've clicked validate to make them ready to go out, and it'll give you a list of all of those assessments that are ready to go. In this case, there's only one. If there are multiples, you could click select all and it would select all of them in the list. Otherwise, you can check off just the ones that you want to include. You can choose both Medicare and or Medicaid depending on which boxes you choose here. Now once you've selected your assessments that are ready to go out, then you can click Save and Generate. You'll have the option to open or save, but we recommend never using open. Instead use save, or preferably save as by choosing this button. You can click Save As, and then it will pop up with a place where you can specify to save that file. So if you have, for example, on your C drive on your computer, if you don't already have a folder for those batches, you can right-click on the C drive, and you can say New Folder, and we're going to say My OASIS Batches. Whatever you want to call it, it doesn't much matter as long as you have a place for putting these files. This file name is a big long number. It's a unique number followed by txt, and you're going to click Save. And so now once it's saved, you can open the folder to view that. So here's my folder. It says My OASIS Batches. And if I wanted to view it, I could double click on it. And it would bring up a text notepad with the contents of that file, which is going to be sent off to the state. Now, it's not necessary for you to view it unless you're just interested to see what's in there. But this is the file that you would send off to the state using your OASIS batch transmission program that's outside of CarePortal. Alright, so now once it's been marked as having been exported and ready to go out for transmission, then you're able to go ahead and process the wrap. So let's go ahead and go home, and the next step in the process, we'll bring up our flowchart again. So at this point it's been transmitted. Once it's been transmitted, it's ready for the wrap to be processed. So, and then the status of that assessment is going to be billed at that point. All right, in order to process the wrap, we're going to go into billing. And the first option that we'll choose is claims to be billed. This is going to give us a list. After we click all dates, you can specify a date range of episodes to pick up, or you can click all dates. It'll give us a list of episodes that have not yet been processed. And so we see for this patient it's Captain Hook, and we can include that patient in the claim to go out. What I also recommend is clicking Display Errors and Warnings, which will cause all errors and warnings that pertain to that particular episode to be displayed. In this case, there are 0 errors, meaning that we're free to go ahead and submit the Medicare claim to Medicare. We should probably click on the warnings to see what is showing that we need to pay attention to. So it's telling us that there's a problem with the NPI of the physician. It's a bogus NPI in this case, but it's just warning us that we can still go ahead and transmit it. But in the real world, I would recommend that you not transmit it because Medicare will likely reject the claim if it does not have a valid NPI. Obviously, this is a bogus patient, so we're not going to be able to successfully check the eligibility, but if we did want to check eligibility for this patient, you could close this pop-up and then click on the patient's name to take us to the patient back in clinical, and then under insurance, in this tab here, INS, there will be a button called eligibility, and then you can check the patient's Medicare eligibility by clicking that button. And in this case, it's going to tell us that the National Provider ID does not exist for the current user. It's not a valid eligibility check. But if it had been a valid eligibility check, you would see details about the patient's coverage, Part A, Part B, MSP, Advantage plans, and so forth. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and click Return to Claims to be Billed. That's going to take us back to where we were when we came to this point. And I'm going to say Display Errors and Warnings. So we didn't successfully check the eligibility, so that was not removed from our list. There are probably up to over 80 edits that are checked for whenever you attempt to check the billing integrity for a particular episode. So there's a lot of things that are being checked, and you just need to make sure everything is clean, at least for the errors, before you send them off to Medicare. So if you're happy with the way it is and you want to go ahead and send it in spite of any warnings that might be there, you can check the checkbox and it will give you one last chance to review the warnings, and if you're okay with those warnings, you can click OK. Now again, if there are any errors whatsoever, if there's one or more errors, then you will not be able to go ahead and include them in the claim. But if it's just warnings, then you're permitted to go ahead with it. So before we actually send them off to Medicare directly, we have a chance to view the Medicare claims in UB04 format. After a moment, the wrap will appear in UB04 format on your screen. You can review it and make sure that it meets with your satisfaction. You can print it out if you wish, or you can just close it out and then go ahead and do the next step, which is to view the Medicare claim list if you wish. So we'll click on that button, and we see that there's one claim and we see the total amount. If there had been multiple claims that we had included in this claim run, we would see all the claims listed with the total at the bottom. You can print this off or just use it for your own review. Now the final step is to actually submit the Medicare claims. These other steps to view and view the Medicare claims themselves and the list, those are optional. The one thing that is required is to go ahead and submit the Medicare claims. We're not going to do this at this point because it's a bogus or test claim that we're using here. But in the real world, in your agency environment, you can simply click this button and it will send it directly off to Medicare. It will create a connection through a secure VPN line directly to Medicare, and it will send it off, and a few minutes later you will receive a 999 acceptance response saying that the claim has been accepted, or it will say rejected if there was a problem with it. Then it will go to the next level, which is a 277 level, to let you know the claim was processed, and if there are any problems, it'll let you know that as well. To see the results of your claim run, you can go into claim batch log. We don't currently have any in this particular database, but you can click search, or you can just come in here and it'll give you a list of all the claims along with how much has been paid and whether it's been processed, all kinds of details that you need to track your claims. So this ends the preliminary Medicare processing training video.